Hello, welcome all. So today we are having Mr. Uday Shah, who is a cybersecurity leader having vast experience of multi-industries, especially in cybersecurity domain. Currently, he is working as a Chief Information Security Officer in India INX, which is leading international exchange situated in GIFT City, Gandhinagar, and which is wholly owned subsidiary of BSE Limited. Today, Uday simplified the DPDP Act, that is Personal Data Protection Act. The question is, could you please help us to understand what the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, that is DPDP Act, and why it is so important today?
So in a very simple term, the DPDP Act is India's very first comprehensive act designed for individuals to protect their personal information.
Okay, and why it is so important today?
So as we are seeing that the industries and technology are growing so fast since last 1 decade, and through the technology, the data, the personal informations are also processing in a very large volume. So it is very important to protect those personal information. So that is the reason I believe this is very important to have this act and to protect the information, the personal data.
Understood. Okay, great. Next question is, who is the DPDP Act primarily designed for, and what was the need for introducing this legislation?
So this act is preliminary designed for individuals like you and me. So now the companies, as I mentioned, since last almost a decade, a lot of companies are collecting and processing personal information, the personal identify information, and there are no such security controls and mechanisms were and are in place. So I think this act going to place a very critical role where those companies who are collecting and processing personal information, they have to have certain controls and mechanism in place to protect this personal information of the individuals.
Okay. Next question is, could you please walk us through the implementation timelines and the roadmap of DPDP Act in India?
So as this act has been in place in Parliament in 2023, in August 2023, and then last year, November 2025, 13 November 2025, the act got the enact rules.
Okay.
So that rule has been given a timeline of 18 months. So if we calculate from November 2025, the 13 November 2025, the 18 months, so it's May 2027. So this is a timeline, 18 months of timeline that all the organizations who are processing or collecting personal information of individuals has to comply with the DPDP Act. So this is a timeline. So currently all the organizations has to comply with the DPDP Act within May 2027.
Okay, so you can consider due date as a May 2027.
13 May to be precise, 13 May 2027.
13 May 2027 will be the due date for the implementation of this DPDP Act.
Right.
Great. So the next question is, which individuals, businesses and the organizations fall under the applicability of this act?
Very nice question. So there is no set of list of any organizations or any individuals.
Okay.
So in a very simple terms, to help the people understand, to simplify this DPDP Act. So whomsoever who is collecting and processing the personal information, they are under radar of this act. So in a layman language, any organization who are collecting or processing that personal information,
Okay.
they have to comply with the DPDP Act of India.
Irrespective of the type or category of the entity.
Correct. So there is no such any rule, but
Okay.
if you are collecting or processing a data, then you have to follow this act.
Okay. Okay. The next question is, what are the key technical and operational processes involved in complying with the DPDP Act?
So from a technical parameters, it's become too technical, but in a nutshell or a layman language, there are 3 pillars that this act has been designed so far. So one is a data principle. The second pillar is a data fiduciary, and also the top layer of the data fiduciary is a significant fiduciary, and the third layer of this act covers the data processing, data processor. So the data principle, that means owner of the data. Let's say myself or yourself.
Correct.
Let's say if you are opening an account, let's say in Amazon or a Flipkart or any online portal, then you are sharing your information, the personal information. That means you are the owner of your data. So you become a data principal as per the act.
Okay.
The company who is collecting the data, they become a data fiduciary.
Okay.
So this act represents the collection of the data, that is a data fiduciary. And if you are collecting a very large amount of data, the personal information, the data that represent the personal information, that become a significant data fiduciary, like say banks,
Correct.
the online merchants portals, those become a significant data fiduciary because they are collecting huge number of data, right? And the third parameter that they have called it out as a data processor. So either a data fiduciary can be a data processor, or
Okay.
the third party vendor who is working on behalf of a data fiduciary, who is processing the data,
Correct.
they become a data processor. So these are the three technical terms has been very specifically called out in this act.
Great. Next question is, how does the act define personal data and what kind of information is covered under it?
So personal information, that any data that we identify as a person, let's say your name, your contact number, your email address, your home address, your Aadhaar card, PAN card,
ID
anything,
proofs, yes.
right? So any data which identify as a person, that
Okay.
is a personal identify information.
Okay.
So this all the data comes under the PII.
Personal data. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Next question is, consent is considered the foundation of this act. Could you please explain what valid consent meant under the DPDP framework?
See, normally we have typically seen that the online portals and websites, they have a
Terms and conditions.
very basic consent management process.
Correct.
That we just need to check it and
Yes.
we need to proceed further, right?
Correct.
But this act has very specifically designed the consent management process, that the consent management has to be very structured manner.
Okay.
The data fiduciary who is collecting the data, they have to call out very specific information, such as what type of information you are collecting,
Okay.
for what purpose,
Correct.
for how long time period,
You
right?
will,
So there are a lot of information. So it's a very structured process that we need to define while we are capturing any information, right? So this is a very specific, and I personally I believe this is a very good initiative of the government of India, that they have very specifically called out the consent management structure process while we are collecting the data. So the data principal should be aware that what information the organization is going to collect, for what purpose they are collecting, and for how much time it will be
how longer they will
remained.
keep that
Correct.
information with
Remain
them.
those data.
Correct. Correct.
So it's become very easy for a data principal like you and me to understand that what my information will be stored for how long period,
Correct.
right? For what purpose they are going to use. So this is very good. The act has covered very specifically terms about the consent process.
So it is very important for each and every person, irrespective of coming from legal background or cybersecurity background, to have knowledge of this information.
Correct.
Next, okay. Does the DPDP Act include specific provisions for children's personal data and parental consent requirements?
Yes. So this is a very important piece, that the DPDP Act has been called out very specifically, that if any data has been processed or captured by from the individuals who are below the 18 years of age, those are covers under the children.
Correct. Minor.
Right?
Correct.
So this act has very specifically called out that if you are collecting any children's data,
Yes.
then you need to take a very rigorous consent from the parents.
Correct.
So this has been very specifically designed, and it also covered very specifically in the act. So if any organization capturing those data, then they have to fulfill the requirement of getting the consent from the parents of the children.
Okay, so for example, we can understand like that if you are opening the mutual fund account and investing on behalf of your minor child, then this is very important for you that you understand the terms and conditions for providing this information.
And very specifically, I'll just call out the one another example like schools and colleges, right?
Correct.
So
They
this
are
is a
also
very
collecting
very
the
specific
and other
area
details.
that the children's data are going to collect and process. So the all the schools and the colleges, they have to follow the DPDP Act while they are processing and collecting the children's data. They have to get the consent from the parents.
Correct, Uday. So currently they have mandated Aadhaar card requirement for every child while enrolling the child
Correct.
into school. So this is very important to know this information. Great. Next, what rights do individuals or the data principals have under the DPDP Act regarding their personal data?
So this is very nice and very interesting. So even your people will also love to understand this. So as I mentioned very clearly, that this act is very specifically for individuals like you and me. So we have all the rights, and government has designed this act specifically for us to protect our data. So any individuals has a right uh, to modify the data. They have rights to ask what type of data that fiduciary has captured. They have rights to change the data. They have rights to delete the data. They have rights to withdraw the consent. So this is I really like about this act that India has very call out very specifically. So there are all the rights that they have given to the individuals, the data principals, that they can act anytime, and they can raise the grievance
Okay.
to the fiduciaries who are collecting the data, and they can ask whatever the data that they have capturing, and they can modify at any time, and they can withdraw that consent anytime.
But if you are associating yourself as a, say for example, you have opened a mutual fund account and you wanted to be associated with and you wanted to continue your SIP or investment for that particular mutual fund, then you won't be able to get back your data until you are associated with that.
So there is a catch in that. So let's say for a principal perspective, if I still have a rights to ask the data fiduciary that what type of data that they have collected so far, I can still ask them to modify my data, because if there is any change in my
Okay.
personal
Updation
information,
from the
that is
updation
my
side.
my duty. It's a
Correct.
principal's duty to update those information to the
To
fiduciary.
inform
Right.
the fiduciary.
Second,
Correct.
definitely there is a catch in terms of consent and a withdrawal, because in a certain regulations,
There is a requirement.
they is from a regulation perspective, the data should be retained for a certain time of period.
Correct.
So in that case, the fiduciary can reply back to the principal that due to the certain regulations, we have to keep this data for a certain time of period, so that cannot be withdrawn.
Correct.
Right. So in that case, the fiduciary can raise that point to the
Correct.
principal, and it's mutually it
Yeah,
has to
for
be
making the
designed as per
compliance
the
of the
regulatory
applicable
perspective.
regulations. Understood. So next question is from an organizational perspective. What should be the high-level approach to start DPDP compliance effectively?
Right. So as I mentioned, the November 2025, the rule has been enacted. So the 18 months of time period, so 1.5 year. So all the organization has to start that the compliance process since the rule has been enacted in the November 2025. So if any organization has not yet acted, so the best way to comply with the DPDP Act, again, it's not a lengthy process. It's a very simple step that personally I have designed, that it's a 3 phase of process. One, definitely we need to do the DPDP gap assessment to understand where we are lacking in perspective of the act has been designed. So what are the controls, the tools and technologies, the policy procedures, the consent management, and blah blah blah, all the things. So that we need to understand that where we are standing today. The second step is once we have a assessment report, then we need to work on the remediation piece of it. That is phase number 2. So then we need to design the policies or modify the policies, the consent management processes, the tools and technology that design specifically for a data protections. So that is a phase 2, and then again a phase 3 where we need to do the DPDP impact assessment, where we will have a real picture that after implementation of all the tools and technology process policies and stuff, where we are standing. So actually these are the three steps become a very easy roadmap for any
Great.
organization to go with the compliance process of the DPDP Act.
Okay, that's great. Our last question is the DPDP Act applicable only within India, or does it also have cross-border implications for global businesses?
So this is very nice question actually. So there is no such limitations as of on a DPDP Act. So the Act very simplified in a very simplified manner. The Act says any organization irrespective of any region, if you are providing any services to Indian users, right, and if you are collecting and processing their personal information, then this act applicable to you. So in a very simple terms, this is not limited to India. This is applicable to across globe.
Okay.
Who are providing services to Indian
India.
consumers,
Great.
right,
Okay.
and collecting and processing their PII, then this
Okay.
act applicable to them,
Okay.
right?
Great.
And there is no such cross-border data transfer boundary or anything that act limits. So the company can still process whatever the way they are processing the data, but it's just that act has been applicable to them. So all the rules and regulations and the protection mechanism that act says, they have to follow that.
So it is not jurisdiction specific. If the entity is providing any client services or collecting data of the Indian resident, then it is mandatory for that entity to comply with this DPDP Act requirement. So this was very helpful and insightful information for all our viewers. Thank you so much, Uday, for spending your time and giving such insightful information. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Devansi.
Great.
Thank you so much, guys.
If you have any queries regarding this topic, you can simply write in the comment section. I'll also mention the LinkedIn profile of Mr. Uday Shah, so you can connect with him directly and you can ask your questions or any queries directly to him as well. Thank you. Keep watching. Stay connected. Bye.